and welcome to Counterpunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners finding the show, welcome aboard. Always happy to have you. Hope you've had a chance to go over to Counterpunch and get a subscription to Counterpunch Plus. That is what we have now replaced the print magazine with. That is where you can go to get all of the great columns, Jeff Sinclair's Gold every week, of course, all of the great features you're used to at Counterpunch, many new contributors as well. Lots of diverse perspectives from all over the left. Go over to Counterpunch. You will help support this project, keep us going. It's been 30 years and we're still doing it. So we have a lot more in the future. Please do support this work. We greatly appreciate that. And of course, we greatly appreciate all of our fellow lefties in the online media space. And we appreciate the work of the Tempest Collective. And I'm very happy to have a member of the editorial board of the Tempest Collective. Aaron Amaral is with me today. We're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about some of the issues on the left. There's so much to discuss. Aaron is also a member of the Ukraine Solidarity Network US, which has recently released a very important letter that I think we need to discuss as well. So with all of that said, Aaron Amaral, welcome to Counterpunch.
Thanks for having me, Eric, and thanks to Counterpunch.
Thank you for your time this evening and for your great work. So let's jump right into our conversation. I mentioned it already, the Ukraine Solidarity Network. Obviously, we're talking about everything related to the war in Ukraine and all of the ramifications, both for the people in Ukraine, but more broadly around the world. So what is the Ukraine Solidarity Network? Why was it formed?
The Ukraine Solidarity Network US is an effort on the part of the broad left in the US to present a front of concrete solidarity with the people of the Ukraine who are, as you well know, and as I hope the listeners understand, facing the kind of brutal effects of the Russian invasion, which is cost thousands of lives and caused millions of refugees and hundreds, if not billions, of dollars in damage. And so it's really an effort to, from below, from the left and from the perspective of the popular movements, to build solidaristic ties with the people of the Ukraine, with the movements in the Ukraine, with trade unionists and people on the left in the Ukraine, and to do that as part of a broad left and a front in the United States, in a context in which the Russian invasion of Ukraine has opened up massive questions for the international left, and really I think is a kind of qualitative marking point for the kind of evolution of kind of the imperialist world system, and in turn has really divided in really fundamental ways the left in terms of how we're choosing to respond. And so this is really an effort for those of us who believe that this is really both in principle a fundamental issue of the democratic rights of Ukrainians and the right to survive and the right to national self-determination, and also strategically the central importance of building these solidaristic ties if we ever really want to create and build opposition to the imperial world system with the forces in Ukraine and the forces in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. It's a model, I think.
So let's expand on that a little further if we could. I mean, can we talk through what are some of the reasons why you and some of the other people involved in building the Ukraine Solidarity Network, what are some of the reasons you felt compelled to do this? Was there anything missing on the left in terms of building those kind of ties that you're talking about?
I mean, not only was there something missing, in many ways, the response of large sections of the left in the United States, for reasons we should talk about and are both understandable and incredibly problematic, has been to see the Russian invasion of the Ukraine in a way that completely erases the experience and the reality of the people in the Ukraine and the people in Eastern Europe, and sees it exclusively through the lens of the question of U.S. empire, which we on the left, for very understandable reasons, have um, been trained for generations to see as the singular and primary kind of mover of the imperial world system. And while that continues to be true, especially in the current world setup, it can't be the exclusive basis on which we understand uh, everything always. And so the Ukraine Solidarity Network really grew out of a meeting that took place at the Socialism Conference in Chicago in September with a Ukrainian activist and academic, Yulia Yurchenko, who was came to the conference specifically to speak about the situation in the Ukraine and the recent history of Ukraine, and to talk about both what's gone on in terms of the Russian invasion, and to talk about the sort of diversity of forces in the Ukraine. She herself is part of the left group Social Movement, and connected to the journal Commons, but gave a perspective that was a very important one for many people um, in the conference. And out of that grew this effort to build a solidarity network, you know, um, similar to not this exactly the same, but similar to efforts that we've seen in other parts of the world, in Europe especially.
It also seems like one of the key goals here is to try to remind people on the left in the United States that our positions on issues internationally are supposed to be guided by our politics and by our ideals, and not by a cold and sort of calculated geopolitics exclusively. And the minute that your politics and your political positions become informed exclusively by geopolitics, it seems that you end up in pretty bad places and justifying pretty awful things. And I think that there are elements on the left that have found themselves in that position today.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, really, fundamentally, without getting too historical or philosophical, it's a product of defeat that we, for decades, the left has really been in retreat and defeat, and in a context in which people give up hope on the possibility of a politic from below, of the possibility of popular organizing and popular resistance. There is a way in which people retreat to a politics between states, and see their own state as the singular enemy, and therefore, other states somehow is in a better, even those other states like Russia, which are profoundly reactionary, can then be seen somehow as you know on the side of good, because they're the enemy of this imperial state. And it's a real loss of perspective, and it's a departure from the historic left, honestly. I mean, that's a bigger conversation, but it's important to say that, because we're standing in a really proud tradition, going back well into the 19th century, about our starting point is really about in the first instance, the defense of democratic rights as a principle, and then as a strategic imperative about building solidarity from below, without any illusions in any state, or the kind of the what's driving the U.S. or NATO in this circumstance, or the European Union.
So one of the things about the Ukraine Solidarity Network and many of the people that are involved with it, many of the people that have signed that open letter, myself included, one of the issues is that I think that all of those people would call themselves anti-war, would call themselves voices for peace, and at the same time, there are many others who also call themselves anti-war and also call themselves voices for peace, who articulate a radically different perspective on the current situation and how we approach the prospect of peace. If you could you try to elaborate the distinctions between these two views and the extent to which we need to really, I guess, pick through the nuances of those positions?
Yeah, I mean, on some level, it's really, on some level, it's not that complicated, because the question is always one: peace on whose terms, and peace in what context? You have a situation materially, concretely, where a massive, army of, hundreds of thousands invaded a sovereign nation, and ensured massive destruction, and the people of Ukraine are facing this military might, and the Putin's regime has captured whatever 20% of the Ukrainian territory, significant parts of the country, after a decade, going back to 2014, after the invasion of Crimea, etc. And so the question is, what does it mean to call for peace in this circumstance? Does it mean that we're saying that the current uh, kind of strategic situation is fine as status quo? We're okay with leaving the Russians with their gains from the last two invasions, if that means a kind of the cessation of hostilities. And would it actually mean the cessation of hostilities? Because I think what we know, given the dynamics of the region, is that if in fact there were a ceasefire tomorrow, it's highly unlikely that that such a ceasefire would be at all stable. I think we on the left need to be very kind of cognizant of the relative strength of our own and impact and influence of our own size and forces, because you know, what is our ability to really to impact the kind of outcome at this moment, and what objectively would peace look like at this moment? And so, yes, we all want peace. We want an end to war, but the question is on whose terms and under what conditions.
The other thing that I think about when I'm trying to, I guess you could say, navigate through these somewhat awkward positions that we've all found ourselves in, and I think it's perfectly acceptable for us to admit that everybody on the left is in an awkward position when faced by an aggressive war that is being carried out by a country that's not the United States. We find ourselves in somewhat uncharted territory for many of us. But what I think is important is to think about what peace would actually mean in Ukraine, because what seems to be discussed in many circles, and I want to get your take on this, is essentially a peace that would be imposed on Ukraine, in essence, imposed from external forces, because it seems like, if you follow many of Putin's public discussions or public statements about the matter, he basically has implied that he's to be negotiating with the United States and with the Europeans. In other words, US, Europe, and Russia, in theory, carving up Ukraine, and Ukraine and Ukrainians are just to kind of accept this. And this is the twisted kind of anti-imperialist politics we're supposed to be advocating.
Absolutely. I mean, the erasure of Ukrainian identity, the erasure of Ukrainian autonomy and agency across these discussions, from the level of high politics and Henry Kissinger to the discussions on the left, are astounding and stunning and frightful when you think about our fellows on the left. And I didn't mean to imply that this was not a challenging issue. It certainly is a challenging issue, and it's important to say how uncharted it is. I think it's important to think about this as kind of that the imperial world system has really changed in some fundamental ways from what's been stable since really the end of the Second World War, and that the rise of a kind of multipolar imperial system, however asymmetrical, however kind of hegemonic the U.S. remains, is something new, and it's something that the left hasn't had to navigate for a few generations at least. But it's not unprecedented. But the point you're making about what it is that you what it is what is what is you what do Ukrainians want?